Hello, fellow food foresters, and welcome back to the final installment of the 7 layers of a food forest. This being the subterranean layer, in other words, the below ground layer. So that includes the roots and the rhizomes of the plants, but it also includes all the other species that live along with and are critical to the function of the forest. The fungi, the bacteria, and all the other creatures that live underground, like earthworms and beetles and nematodes and arthropods, and there's so many different classes of organisms that make up a very complex ecological ecology below ground. In the 7th layer, the subterranean layer, as it was originally described by the original authors of permaculture and food forest gardening, they focused on the food plants in that 7th layer, things like sweet potatoes and potatoes and um, the tropical root-bearing plants like cassava, for example. Um, but the real story, the real important thing that's really emerged is the mycorrhizal fungi. And they've got long hair-like strands that connects the entire forest together in a big network called the Wood Wide Web. There are 3 kinds of mycorrhizal networks that we primarily look at. The ectomycorrhizal network. Ectomycorrhizal fungi do not penetrate into the plant's roots, but they surround the roots, and they make their exchange of what I call the commodities, where the plants are giving the fungi the sugars that they need to live, and the fungi in return are giving the plants water and nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, iron. They're also giving them water, so the roots of the plants can get water, but also the mycorrhizal fungi bring them water as well. So the fungi can be thought of as an extension of the plant's roots. So the ectomycorrhizal fungi is one main type, and that covers your big trees mainly, like these big oak trees and chestnut trees in the back, pecan trees, hickory trees, including pecan, which is a type of hickory, would be in that network. The other big type that's really important for a food forest, because this is the one that connects all your fruit trees together, and that's the AM network. This network is actually penetrating into the cell walls of the roots. So the fungi in the plant's roots are actually living, the fungi is living inside the plant. I guess that's kind of similar to the gut microbiome that live inside us and help us digest our food. So yeah, the AM network is, and that stands for arbuscular mycorrhizal. They connect together your fruit trees. Many plants are connected together in this network. These Mexican sunflowers, for example, would be, and this loquat, and just all your fruit trees. And then the third type, mainly it's just, it's just your blueberries. So here's some blueberries. They're an interesting plant because they have their own mycorrhizal network, links together all the blueberry plants, but they do not share the resources with the other plants. And the mycorrhizal networks, though, the major ones, the ectomycorrhizal and the arbuscular, they actually seem to be so important to the forest that they're more important even than a keystone species. So in biology and ecology, a keystone species is so important to the forest that if the keystone species were to be removed from the ecosystem would pretty quickly collapse. It would become much less productive, much less resilient, Be less biodiversity in the ecosystem. The ecosystem would survive, but it would be much less for it. Whereas with the mycorrhizal fungi, ecologists now believe that forests would not even exist without mycorrhizal fungi. It's in the fungi's best interest to help create a home that's moist and loaded with sugars. So what does it got to do to make that happen in a forest? Well, it needs to distribute all of the fertility and the water that it moves around. And by the way, it also distributes compounds that help with immune response, different hormones. It actually carries hormones around the forest. And the mycorrhizal fungi decide which roots they want to exchange all these commodities with. And they get some sugar from the root, but they give things to those roots that help those plants survive. And for them to have an environment that's really shady, really moist, loaded with sugar, which is what they would want, the very best environment they can have, well, it's very, very simple. In order to do that, the forest needs to be really rich and robust. It needs to be really shady. It needs to be very productive with lots of green leaves collecting sunlight and pumping sugar into the ground. So it needs, all the canopy needs to be complete, or at least the canopy and the understory and all the other levels need to be complete enough that the forest floor is really good and shady. That way the water is, the moisture is retained. And the more leaves you have in the sunlight and photosynthesizing, the more sugars get pumped down into the ground. So really the big, most important organism or species in the subterranean layer is the mycorrhizal fungi. So what do we do with that as gardeners? Well, we want to encourage that, so we want to do two things. We want to have all 7 layers designed into our food forest, and we want to not disturb the soil as much as possible. So as you can see in my young food forest, it's only 9 months old since we started it. Yes, we've mulched. We can see right in here where we've thrown some mulch down. That's because we're trying to convert this bacteria-dominated neutral pH soil. We're converting it over to fungally dominated acidic soil, because that's what trees and shrubs like. Woody trees and shrubs like to live in fungally dominated soil that's down around a pH of about around 5.5. Whereas these grasses, they live in a bacteria dominated soil that's up more like a pH of 6.5. But we're slowly converting the grasses over to the more fungally dominated, more acidic soil. But in the meantime, where we're not ready to plant enough trees and shrubs yet, we're letting the green dominate. We're not going to cover all that green up with mulch prematurely, because it is still pumping sugar into the ground, and that helps support the mycorrhizal network. So that's the other thing we can do as gardeners, is just the right amount of mulch, and mulch at the right time when you've got woody plants that are ready. If your woody plants are still here photosynthesizing, like this winged sumac, then there's sugars getting pumped into the ground right here. The saprophytic fungi are working on all this mulch material that I threw down. And then, those are just the decomposing fungi. And then once they've done their work, those nutrients become available for the mycorrhizal fungi to pick up and move around. But you take like this area right here, which really doesn't have any trees or shrubs planted in it yet. This whole area right here is bare, and I haven't gotten to it yet to plant anything. So I'm going to leave this like it is. I'm going to leave it green, and let photosynthesis occur and let those sugars go into the ground. And it promotes a living soil. It is more bacteria dominated, but it's still a living soil, and that's better than just a bunch of mulch and dirt without any sugars going into the ground. So the mycorrhizal network is really important, and we have to think about it when we design our gardens. And we have to help it. The more we help it, the more it will help our entire food forest grow. And like I said, its number one interest is in having the most solar panels, being plants' leaves, and the shadiest ground so that moisture is retained. So as much as we want to grow a forest so that we've got shade, so that our backyards are shady and cool in Florida where it's so darn hot in the summertime, well, the mycorrhizal fungi want that too. So we need to partner with them and help make that happen. So to do that, we shouldn't till, and we shouldn't reduce photosynthesis and sugars going into the ground any more than necessary. Like I said, we will do it somewhat around our trees and shrubs, but the reason for that is because we're converting to a fungally dominated, more acidic soil. Okay, I hope that makes some sense. The mycorrhizal network, the most important part of the subterranean layer. And that concludes our series on the 7 layers of the food forest. I hope that was helpful. If anybody has any questions, I'd sure love to read your questions in the comments, and I'd love to get back to you and communicate with you. All right, everybody, y'all take care now and happy gardening.